Welcome back to Dry Eye Fireside Chat. I'm Dr. Damon Dierker, coming to you from Indianapolis. I'm very happy to have a veteran of the chat, Dr. Cory Lappin, coming to us from Ohio, from the Dry Eye Center of Ohio. Cory, welcome back.
Thank you. I'm excited to be back.
So we're going to talk about Epiphora, tearing, watering. For some of us, someone comes in with that complaint, hey, let's take it on, ready to go. We have to get to a diagnosis. Really, that's the most important thing, right? Others is like, I'm not so sure, or start this and we'll go from there. So really we want to look at how we manage this in a systematic way, because this is a complaint that 10, 20 years ago, maybe we had a lot fewer options to be able to manage these patients. But really, I want to dive into a case because Cory and I, we were talking earlier about some interesting scenarios where the patient came in with a complaint of watering. So we know that this is a common complaint, but I would say is very often mismanaged. And this is something that if we have a practical step-by-step approach to it, we can really help our patients. So Cory, when I say, if I was coming into your clinic, I said, my problem is my eyes tear, they water. What sorts of things are you going to ask me, or what sorts of things are you thinking about in terms of a differential diagnosis, or what may be next steps?
Yeah, Epiphora, I will say, when it comes to managing ocular surface disease, it can be a tough one, right? Because like many things, like we all say, dry eye, ocular surface disease, these things are multifactorial. Well, guess what? Epiphora itself can be multifactorial. And really, when I hear that, it's basically telling me, okay, this is going to be a process of elimination. And it really is, I will say, within ocular surface disease, I would say Epiphora is one of the more challenging things that we have to tackle because there can be so many factors to this. So the first thing I do is I'm going to delve into the history here. The biggest thing is obviously asking, is it, bilateral, unilateral? Is it one eye? Because that's already going to kind of give me an idea of what we're dealing with. But I also try to always take, an easiest approach, what makes the most sense for this. So if someone says that their eyes are watering, let's go with what's probably the most common thing. We normally see it as dry eye, right? We're getting that reflex tearing, especially if they do say it's bilateral. So that's kind of where I go first. First, I'm like, okay, I want to investigate the dry eye side of things. And I like to explain to the patient my thought process as I'm going, because I want them to know exactly where I'm going. And I tell them that exact same thing. This can be a lot of different things, but the most common one I probably see is that reflex tearing from dry eye. Would you say that's probably what you normally see the most?
Yeah, I think that's far and away the most. But I think that where you can go sideways is if you assume that's all it is, right? And you treat it as dry eye before you really dig in. And I agree with you that history is going to be, as always, one of the most important things that we do when we try to decide how to help this patient.
Yeah, I mean, and I completely agree with you there. That's the thing is, no, it's the most common, but like you said, I think I've probably seen the cases that, just keep dragging on, are the ones where it's assumed dry eye, and that's where the investigation ends. And that's really where, kind of like we were talking about, the case I have is the one that really kind of shows you why you really, even if you think you've got it, you probably need to still keep digging.
Yeah, so interested in learning more about this case that you kind of teased it earlier for me. Tell me about this patient, what brought them in, and then how did you address their chief complaint of Epiphora?
Yeah, so to start off, this was a dry eye patient of mine. I had seen her before. Her biggest issue now is she had developed Epiphora, and it was bilateral. So the patient, little demographic information, she was an African-American patient in her 60s, and she had developed a bilateral Epiphora. So given her history, she was a dry eye patient, I'm like, okay, this would make sense that she'd have this. But at the same time, I didn't want to just say that would be the entirety of this, because I've been managing her dry eye for a while and she'd been doing okay. So now all of a sudden she gets this Epiphora. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Now, a key piece of her history is she also had sarcoidosis. Now, that's often associated with dry eye, so not necessarily going to be something that's completely out there. But despite all the management we had doing for dry eye, I added a couple more things. I'm like, okay, let's see if we can tune this up again. Maybe this is a flare. She did not respond to any of the increases in dry eye treatment. So like you said, this is where the rabbit hole could have kept going, and I could have kept throwing more and more dry eye treatments at her. But now I'm like, okay, so let's start really diving into things. And my general approach to Epiphora, the first thing I do is, like I like to do most things, it's the physical examination. I like to work my way outside in. So I took a close look at the anatomy here. So what I'm always looking first, I'm looking at the lids. So lid position is huge, right? Because remember the punctum, we always kind of think it's just this drain, right? It's just this passive drain, but really there's capillary action. It's actually sucking the tears in with each blink. So if you have lid malposition, if you have an entropion, an ectropion, probably one of the most missed things I see as the lids get more lax is a punctal ectropion. And I'm sure you see that all the time, right? You literally see the puncta like flopped outwards, and I don't know how you're going to drain anything when the drain is not even in contact with the ocular surface, right?
But I would say that you have to look for it, and you have to say, I'm looking for medial ectropion, because it's something that it's subtle, and you do have to pay attention to it. But I make that diagnosis pretty routinely.
Yeah. So I looked at that for this patient. I'm like, okay, lid position is good. No, I mean, a little bit of laxity, but nothing I would expect to really be, causing the epiphora. So I looked externally. Things were looking good from lid position. So now we're starting to think, okay, I've kind of not thinking this is dry eye. Now let's go into the internal structures. So this is where you start thinking about the whole drainage system, right? So through the puncta, the canaliculus, into the lacrimal sac, and the nasal lacrimal, duct there at the end. So is it obstructive? Is there something going on here? And this is where I will say I will delve myself, but I always kind of like to get another look at this, because I don't know about you doing the Jones 1 and Jones 2. Sometimes it's fine for me. Other times I'm like, I don't know if I really got a whole lot of information from it.
I don't think it provides a whole lot of value for me to understand what I need to do for this patient. For me, it's really about probe and irrigation when I'm looking at the outflow system, because once you start doing these a lot, I mean, I do these on a daily basis for multiple reasons, is you understand what's normal and what's not normal, right? And
Yep.
I tell patients when I do something like that, it's both diagnostic and therapeutic, right?
Yep.
Depending on what's going on. So I assume that part of your next steps after your typical OSD evaluation, careful look at external exam, lid position, would be, looking, does this patient have an obstruction, right?
Yes. And that's what I'll do. And I'll just do the classic, see if I can irrigate some saline through, like you said, see if they can get anything through, because sometimes it's therapeutic. And that's also where you're going to see if you get nothing through, okay, you might be dealing with some obstruction here. But even if you get some through, that doesn't mean you're out of the woods, right? Like, yeah, I mean, that's non-physiologic. That's the big thing. You're forcing this through. It's not like when they believe they're getting this high pressure flush of saline through. That's not every day.
No, I mean, there's a lot of, gray area there where there's a partial obstruction. I sometimes tell a patient, a little bit tongue in cheek, I'm going to give your tear system, outflow system, the Heimlich maneuver, right? And you got to be careful, because sometimes if there's an obstruction, you can cause some discomfort for a patient. But most of the time, I can understand pretty quickly how abnormal it is. But I want to take maybe one step back, Cory, is when you say I'm looking at the lids and I'm looking at the lid position, is like kind of walk through physically how you're doing that. Like, how are you manipulating things? What are you doing at the slit lamp or outside the slit lamp, so that people can get a visual for what this looks like?
Oh, yeah. So first thing I do to look at lid laxity, if you just even want to evaluate basic closure, before doing behind the slit lamp, just gently tell them to gently close their eyes, kind of tilt their head back up a little bit like this. Just take a transilluminator and look at the lid margin. See if there's that gap. If you see a gap, it's obvious you have lagophthalmos, so you're maybe not getting a complete closure. But sometimes you can even get an incomplete lid seal where the lids do touch, but they're not making a nice airtight seal. Easy way to check for that is then take the transilluminator, put it gently against the upper lid, and if you see any kind of rays of light going out through, then you've got some incomplete lid seal. Now, that may or may not affect epiphora to some degree. What we're really looking at is the positioning of the lids. So to me, I always go back to what's normal. So for the upper lid, you want it about maybe 1 to 2 millimeters below the superior limbus. That's your natural position there. But really, especially with epiphora, we're concerned about that lower lid. And that margin should be at or slightly above that lower, limbus right there. If it's below and you can see any white, you've got inferior scleral show, and that should not be there. Like, that's not normal anatomy to have that. So now you know that you're maybe getting some laxity or you're having a bit more exposure. So now I'm starting to think we might be getting some reflex tearing to compensate. Then, of course, for that position, you want to make sure that the lid is nicely opposed to the globe. You want it to be in contact, but you don't want it to be involuted, right? Because that's when we're getting the entropion. So you don't want to see the lashes turn backwards. So first look at the lid margin position, then make sure everything's good, nice adhesion to the globe. If it's forward too much, then I'm worried about an ectropion. If it's kind of curl back in, I'm worried about entropion. So I always use my anatomical landmarks, and it's really the lid margins positioning is big for that. Do you do anything different from at least the anatomical perspective?
I mean, what you just described to me, it appears that you were looking over my shoulder when I was doing an examination earlier today, because I'm doing, my history as I talk with the patient, I'm doing some external exam. I'm using Cord Blackie light test to look for incomplete lid seal. I'm doing some things that outside the slit lamp, looking at, rosacea and other dermatologic issues. And then I look at them at the slit lamp and say, is this a normal lid position? Because if it's not, or if it's asymmetric, I know that's at least one of the things we're going to have to address. And you said at first is a lot of times these cases are multifactorial. Mm-hmm. And I do think you need to tell the patient early on is tearing can be caused by a lot of different things. And in my experience, it's more than one thing the majority of the time, right? So I think we have to have a systematic approach to doing that. But I wanted to kind of dig in on this because this is something that I do think is overlooked. And going to make sure that if this patient needs to go to oculoplastics, you're going to have a better referral if you do a better exam.
Yeah. And part with that, the other big thing is make sure you actually touch the lids. It's one thing to look at them, because the laxity of the lids, man, you have to do that manipulation. So the easiest way to do that is just gently lift up on that upper lid. It should have a little bit of pullback. If you pull that thing and it basically goes over their head, now you're dealing with something like floppy eyelid syndrome. And trust me, you're going to know. You're going to pull on that thing and it's going to be up before you even know it. And then you're looking at things like obstructive sleep apnea, all kinds of issues there. And because you have excess laxity, that can actually rub against the surface, which can create epiphora. And then the other thing is, if you have excess laxity on the lower lid, so one thing you can do is called the snapback test. So that's where you literally pull the lower lid down, and it should snap back to position in about a second. If it takes longer than that, it might be a little bit of excess laxity. But then also don't forget about the conj too. Conjunctival chalasis is probably one of the biggest drivers that I see that's missed for epiphora, because you're basically, I tell the patient, you have these little wrinkles on your surface of your eye, and every time you blink, you're kind of rubbing against them, and it's disrupting the tear dynamics, so it's going to stimulate reflexive tearing. I've actually seen that quite a bit. Have you seen that as well, as far as like one of the causes of epiphora being excessive conjunctival chalasis?
Yeah, so a patient comes in and I see condylasis. Unless it's 3 or 4 pluses, I'm probably addressing other things first. But I let patients know that issue exists. And if we get through other things that we've identified that are maybe a little bit more straightforward to treat, and we still are having this tearing and we're still having foreign body sensation, is we may have to do some additional work on the outside layer of the white of the eye, because that is going to be something that can cause tearing as well. I agree.
Yeah, I think though you bring up an excellent point right there. Sometimes when we're doing this, you want to try to address the simple things first, right? Because quite frankly, a lot of what we're going to talk about, even next in the case I'm talking about, they're a lot more invasive and a lot more involved. So you want to make sure you're also, it's a balance with this. You don't want to overlook some of the things, but you also want to make sure you're jumping to the more involved options before you have to for this. So if you've kind of looked at these mechanical elements that we've been talking about, like I did for my patient, I'm like, okay, so still not really having issues here. So now we're thinking it's really, lacrimal drainage system. So I'm like looking, are there signs of an infection, a dacryocystitis? Now that's normally due to a blockage, but you want to make sure is an acute infection. Now this was bilateral, right? So maybe not as likely. So that's normally going to be a unilateral thing. And what I found was, when I did the irrigation, maybe a little through, but it didn't give any prolonged relief. It wasn't like I, flushed out the obstruction or anything like that. So this is where, once I've kind of got through that point where I've looked, I'm like, okay, it doesn't look like it's mechanical on the outset. Not really thinking it's a dry eye, issue for this. And now I'm really thinking it's obstruction. After I do that, that's where I'm like, okay, let's have oculoplastics take a look. That's actually for me, Damon. I don't know about you. Oculoplastics is probably my number one referral for me having a dry eye clinic, because that's normally my next step when something's going on for me that really can't be managed in my clinic. Is normally something I'm having oculoplastics take a look at.
Absolutely. And I think that there are things that we can do to make sure that is the most appropriate next step referral. And it really comes down to the systematic exam and your history. Another thing I think about a patient like this is, if you've been managing their dry eye and they're on anti-inflammatory therapy, you're doing things in the office, and all of a sudden they have epiphora, it's like, what changed here? Did they do something different? Did they have a new medical diagnosis? Have they been on a chemotherapy, which can sometimes cause some issues? This patient has sarcoidosis, so what ultimately came about once you made that referral to oculoplastics when you did determine that this was a outflow obstruction issue?
Yeah. So once I knew that, I'm like, okay, this is where it was like, for me, this is like the slam dunk referral I got there. And what they did find is there was a significant obstruction. They're basically like, yeah, this is nothing. We can't do anything minor. We can't really do like a stent. This will get to take a DCR. That's basically what it did. So they're like, it's going to be a dacryocysto-rhinostomy. We've got to reconstruct that. And that's not something that's often done lightly. That is basically when they're like, we cannot do the mild basically intervention here. And what they found is when they did that, you always biopsy tissue, right? When you're doing any removal or anything like that. And what they found, and this was very interesting, they actually had infiltration of the lacrimous sac from her sarcoidosis.
Wow.
So if you recall, sarcoidosis is a chronic inflammatory condition that it's characterized by the presence of non-caseating granulomas. And these granulomas were actually in her lacrimous sac, causing the obstruction, which to me was a fascinating thing. When I looked it up, I think it was like something like 2% of cases of sarcoidosis have this. And it was just a really good reminder to me, basically saying that this was a dry eye patient, right? It would have been so easy for me to continue chasing that. But looking at the totality of everything, so she had that. And after that, actually, they held off on doing the left eye because they said they wanted to get the inflammation more under control before they went in and did another surgery for her.
Definitely an interesting case, and a careful history, thorough investigation, and making sure that we have a plan for someone that comes in with an unexpected new problem when we've been managing their ocular surface appropriately. But for any reason, I think that for me, it's history, that lid evaluation, typically doing some sort of probe and irrigation. Once I've looked at everything else, because again, dry eye MGD, very, very common to have this, but more often than not now, I'm irrigating these patients to start because I don't want to miss an obstruction. Yep. Even if they have a dry eye issue, if I miss obstruction, we're going to be frustrated down the road because I want to understand that as a data point to help me understand what this patient's journey is going to look like. So I do a lot more of these than I did in the past. I've almost never regretted doing a probe and irrigation because for patients that have chronic inflammation, that have there's a lot of reasons to do it. Even if you don't find an obstruction, it tells you something. But again, like I said earlier, it is therapeutic. So a couple take-home points, Cory, as we look at how do you manage a patient that comes in with the chief complaint of my eyes water, my eyes tear. A couple of pearls as we wrap things up.
Basically, again, be systematic about it. The way I think about it is I try to put things into categories so it's easy for you to remember. So obviously, dry eye is going to be on your differential. You've got that down. Then I like to think mechanical causes. So for mechanical, I'm always looking at lids. All the things we talked about earlier, Damon. Look at the lids, look at the external surface, see if there's any changes to the lid position. That would be a mechanical issue. Once you've ruled that out, now we're moving into the obstructive territory. And that's where, like you said, it's such an easy reach. Just do a quick irrigation. That's going to yield a lot of information for you. And then if you're still having issues, at this point, not only have you figured a lot out, but you now have a great referral to oculoplastics. And really, if you kind of take that like 3-category approach, you're going to be able to get this down pretty quickly. It makes something that's actually pretty complex really straightforward. But like you said, being systematic about it is the thing. If you kind of, change up what you do each time, it gets a little bit convoluted. So really just make sure you're very methodical. Make sure you kind of do your own protocol. When you see Epiphora, you say, first I'm going to look at this, then I'm going to look at this, and do it the exact same way every time. And you're going to find that you're getting really good at rolling things out.
Yeah, I agree. Great stuff, Cory. A lot of good pearls. It's great to have you back in the Midwest, just down the road from me. And thanks for all you do for your patients and for eye care education, especially in the OSD space.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Damon.